medieval sweetie pies, turnips, hogs, knuckles, and hedgehog tarts. Well, perhaps not those last two, but certainly the rest. If this is your first time, hello, and please do subscribe. If you enjoy learning about all things medieval, the Middle Ages were full of delicious treats that would make any modern junk food lover drool. In fact, many of our favorite desserts can trace their origins back to medieval kitchens. As I mentioned earlier, fruit was quite rare during the Middle Ages. If you weren't wealthy enough to afford to have fruit trees planted, are you interested in trying any of them? Let me know down in the comments. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you next time. And maintained on your land, you'd have to rely on what you could forage or purchase from traveling vendors. For those who couldn't afford either, they had often seen as a poor man's food, turnips, along with other root vegetables, like parsley and carrots, were boiled or mashed and mixed with eggs, honey, or dried fruit, then encased in a simple crust. This dish was essentially a budget sweet that allowed people to enjoy the taste of fruit under the guise of pastry and a touch of honey. The earliest recipe for something like turnip pie appeared in the form of a posset, a type of English gruel made with milk, flour, ginger, and mashed turnip. This may have been served for breakfast or dessert. While turnips themselves are quite bitter, adding fruit, honey, or even spices help to mask the unpleasant flavors. And while you probably won't find many of these foods in medieval homes, they were likely available in markets during the Middle Ages. These handheld pies were convenient and portable, containing whatever meat was available at the time, along with a few spices to help conceal its age. Filling could include pork, mutton, venison, rabbit, or even hedgehog. In England, these little pies were wrapped in thick pastry to keep the contents warm and edible for as long as possible. They were great for travelers, shepherds, and those working in the fields, as well as soldiers on the march. There are records of entire armies being fed from the sale of peas. During the reign of Henry V, thousands upon thousands of pasties were prepared every day, each containing several different meats. Though many associate pasties with Cornwall, where they are still commonly eaten, they were prepared all throughout Great Britain and Ireland. During the Middle Ages, they also remained popular through the Victorian era and are still enjoyed today. Pasties were usually made by women, who would often prepare and sell them in taverns or at markets. This type of portable food was perfect for profit, because it required no plate or utensils and could easily be eaten by hand. And let's face it, who doesn't love a good handheld pie? So without further ado, let's dive right in. In today's video, we'll be looking at some medieval junk food delights. If you've been here before, welcome back. These pastries, which consisted of chopped wild apples folded into a coarse batter of flour, egg, and sometimes ale, were then deep-fried in reused animal fat, probably pork or beef drippings. They were finished with a dusting of sugar or a drizzle of honey or spiced syrup and sold as a market day treat. This was actually an efficient way to use leftover fats and incorporate fruit into a normally heavy diet. Fruit in general was quite hard to come by during the Middle Ages, especially if you weren't wealthy enough to grow your own. Wild apples were picked seasonally and made into cider, dried for eating later, or incorporated into dishes like apple fritters. First up, we have apple fritters. Apple fritters are believed to have originated in France, Italy, and Germany around the year 900 AD. Next, we have cheese curds, perhaps one of the most medieval-sounding foods out there. Curds are a very old dairy product consisting of fresh, bite-sized clumps of curdled milk. They were lightly salted and eaten raw, fried, or crumbled over other dishes. To make them, milk was soured with a little vinegar or rennet, then heated to the point it thickened and turned into small curds. Though technically not a junk food because of how filling and nutritious they are, curds were considered a tasty treat that could easily be prepared and enjoyed on the go, making them quite popular. Peasants, monks, and travelers alike enjoyed this portable snack, often eating them with bread or over salads. The 18th century English traveler Richard described eating cheese curds when he visited France in 1660. He said that in villages, women and children sell cheese curds called in French fromage blanc. That is, white cheese. It's made of curdled milk that they cut into slices and seasoned with salt and pepper. They say it's very good. I can assure you, it is. The method of preparation has changed very little since the Middle Ages, and you can still buy fresh cheese curds in many places across Europe. Now we're moving on to something a little less pleasant, but definitely worth a mention. Turnip pie. Meat paste. The final item on our list of medieval junk food might be the most exciting. Meat paste. So there you have it. 4 types of medieval junk food that would satisfy any modern sweet or savory tooth. Did any of these foods surprise you? You would unbelieve me if I told you the French were eating deep-fried eels 800 years before it was trendy. But that's just one of the many weird foods the medieval people ate on a regular basis. So let's get weird with some of the most bizarre medieval recipes. And do you and forget to vote for your favorites at the end, so we can make more videos like this. Candied fennel seeds. The fennel plant grows wild across Europe and is known today for its licorice-flavored leaves. Perhaps watery gruel, moldy bread, maybe some boiled cabbage. A medieval cookbook called The Good Huswife contained a wide range of recipes intended to help women of the era perform their domestic duties. While these staples were common among the lower classes, the wealthy had access to a wider variety of foods, including fruits from far-off lands. Thanks to improved drying techniques, fruits like raisins, figs, and dates could last for years. But when the weather took a turn for the worse, or there wasn't an open fire available, cooking became a bit more difficult. Enter the medieval pancake. Thinner than modern pancakes, these flat griddle cakes were cooked on a lightly oiled griddle and flavored with milk, eggs, and sometimes fruit. While they may not have been quite as decadent as modern stack of blueberry pancakes, they likely tasted pretty good. But they weren't always sweet. Savory versions were popular for breakfast or dinner. Another popular baked good was the wafer biscuit, thin and crispy. These wafers were often pressed into religious or floral molds. They were easy to make, quick to bake, and perfect for a snack on the go. Religious orders often sold them outside of churches, and the money earned from the sales went to support the church. The thin wafers were a hit with customers, but it wasn't long before non-religious bakers started selling similar cookies. Fresh fruit was a luxury, but dried fruit was affordable enough that it could be incorporated into the everyday diet. We've already talked about medieval people enjoying fried fish skin, but what about the rest of the fish? Let us know in the comments section below, and thanks for watching. You might not see eel on the menu at your favorite seafood restaurant, but during the Middle Ages, this slimy fish was a popular choice. While the dish may seem unusual today, it was well liked during the Middle Ages, even earning the approval of Pope Gregory VIII. He is said to have enjoyed a plate of fried eel prepared with butter, vinegar, pepper, salt, parsley, and a sprinkle of ground ginger. Eels were popular with both peasants and nobles. It was even permitted as a meatless dish during fasting days. There's nothing quite like a good old-fashioned eel to bring the community together. But there was another option. The wealthy could indulge in a special treat called sucket. To make sucket, place fruit in a pot, then cover it with syrup made of sugar, ginger, saffron, and other spices. Bring the mixture to a boil, then reduce heat and simmer gently for up to 3 hours. After straining the syrup, add more sugar to thicken it and drizzle it over the fruit. The end result is fruit boiled in syrup, candied, and coated with sugar. Think of it almost like a medieval version of candy. It has the texture of dates or raisins, but tastes like caramel and burnt sugar. Written in 1570, the book was written by English author Thomas Dawson and was one of the first cookbooks to ever be printed in England. But it has roots that stretch back through history to ancient Greece and Rome. During the Middle Ages, blood pudding was common throughout Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. It's easy to understand why. At a time when food was scarce and calories were hard to come by, blood pudding was a nutrient-dense, iron-rich snack that required minimal ingredients. But it didn't always get a great reputation. In 1747, a London doctor described blood pudding as a dish too gross and too animal for the palate of a refined Englishman. Still, the people kept eating it. And while there are a variety of ways to prepare blood pudding, one recipe calls for mixing cooked animal blood with oats, fat, and onions. The mixture is then shaped into balls and fried. The blood adds a unique texture and rich flavor. And if you're looking for a souvenir to remember your trip to Ireland, Scotland, or Wales, a package of blood pudding will definitely do the trick. As you might expect from a book targeted towards housewives, several of its recipes called for stale bread being put to good use. 2 recipes in particular call for dunking stale bread into various liquids to give it new life. The first recipe calls for cutting stale bread into cubes, placing them into a vessel, and covering them with cheap ale. Let it soak for a while, then add some salt and pepper, and enjoy. No fuss, no muss. It's basically medieval croutons. But the second recipe takes things a step further. Here's how it goes. Take stale bread, cut it into small pieces, and dip them in spiced wine, adding more bread until the liquid is absorbed. Season with salt, pepper, ginger, and cinnamon. Add more liquid if necessary, and serve warm. The dish is called SOPs and wine. In France, the dish is known as potage de pain, which translates roughly to bread soup. And you know what? Those fancy French chefs can dress it up with all kinds of ingredients and call it haute cuisine. But sometimes it's nice to stick with the basics. But wait, don't get any ideas about making a complaint to your lord about how terrible the food is. Remember, your life is still way better than theirs. Today, we know that a diet lacking in essential nutrients can have serious health consequences. But back then, cooking techniques were limited, and food preservation methods were rudimentary at best. But that doesn't mean that medieval cuisine lacked variety. Medieval people managed to incorporate a wide range of ingredients into their diets, including a variety of fish. A fish supper was a rare treat for many medieval families, and when they got the opportunity to eat them, they made sure not to waste anything. The skin might be boiled with the fish, but it would become so soggy that it wasn't very appetizing. What to do? Simply fry it up. That's exactly what medieval cooks did, turning leftover fish skins into a tasty snack called fish skin cracklings. The recipe is simple. Take leftover fish skins, Fry them in oil until they read crackly and crispy, and season them with salt or chopped fresh herbs. These cracklings would be sold by taverns and markets throughout the Middle Ages, and they weren't just eaten by common folk. King Richard the Lionheart enjoyed them so much that he reportedly had a personal supply brought along during the Third Crusade. They're a popular garnish, an ingredient in Italian cuisine, and while you're unlikely to find them in your local grocery store, you can order them online if you're feeling brave enough to try them. Not all baking in the Middle Ages was done for the purpose of dessert. Some breads were made primarily for their keeping qualities. Take, for instance, the medieval honey cake. It sounds sweet, but this dense loaf of flour, water, and honey could be kept for up to 6 months. The recipe appears in multiple 15th century cookbooks and requires long, slow baking. The author of one cookbook recommends putting the bread in a croaked pot with a good fire to ensure that the crust stays intact. If all goes well, the result is a dark, hard, glossy loaf that can be cut into slices and enjoyed sparingly as a treat or given as a gift. Various spices could be added to the dough, such as saffron, ginger, pepper, cinnamon, cloves, mace, and cardamom. Dried fruits like raisins or currants could also be included. One version of the recipe calls for a pound of honey, 3 pounds of flour, a quarter pint of water, a quarter pint of wine, a nutmeg, a little ginger, some salt, and 4 ounces of butter. The recipe instructs the baker to start by heating the oven to the hottest it will go. Then mix together the honey, water, wine, and spices. Gradually work in the flour until it forms a stiff dough. Roll out the dough into a round shape about 1 inch thick. Prick the roll with a fork. Put it in a greased pan and bake it for 2 hours. Turn the loaf occasionally to ensure it cooks evenly and keep reducing the heat as it cooks down. Once it's finished, brush the top with melted butter. In theory, this recipe should last for up to 6 months, although a hungry medieval peasant probably wouldn't keep it around that long. But it's the seeds that are important here. The seeds are coated in hard shells that require some effort to crack open, but inside is a tasty treat. According to Gervas of Tilbury, who wrote the famous 12th century encyclopedia, The Foam of Curry, to candy them, he says, you take the fennel seeds and parboil them in vinegar, and then drain them and dry them over a low heat. Then you toss them into boiling hot sugar syrup made from white wine, vinegar, and ginger. This process creates a hard candy shell around each seed. The candy-coated fennel seeds were served after a meal to help freshen the eater's breath and aid digestion. In our modern world, there are only a few small producers of candied fennel seeds and other candied spice seeds in Europe, but they've become quite the delicacy. Now, on to something much larger than a tiny fennel seed. Honey cake. Fish skin. When you think of the typical medieval peasant diet, what comes to mind? Ale-soaked bread and soaps and wine. Dried fruit and sucket. Not all medieval diets were full of meat and potatoes, or rather meat and bread. Blood pudding balls. Blood pudding might sound like a dish, best left to the iron islands of wet medieval pancakes and wafers. Most medieval cooking was done on a griddle or over an open flame. Fried eel. What do you think of these weird medieval foods? Did anything catch your fancy? Which dish would you try and which would you pass up?